We are so thrilled to open up this session of our conference. Where do we go from here? Black-Irish relations, revisiting Black-Irish relations and responding to a transnational moment, by conducting a public interview with someone who is just a wonderful example of the work that we've been doing to really demonstrate the intersectionality, if I can use that term, of the American experience in terms of Irish and African or Black or Brown identities. I'm speaking about Fionnghula, who sometimes goes by Fig O'Reilly. And I'm really delighted and honored that Fionnghula, as I will refer to her in the interview, has joined us today, myself and Kim, to talk to her about her ideas on some of the themes that have informed the Black, Brown and Green Voices project and indeed inform this conference. Fionnghula is an Irish-American model, beauty pageant title holder, engineer, science communicator, and advocate for diversity in STEM. The 28-year-old recently made history as the first woman of colour and first Black woman to represent Ireland at an international beauty pageant. In 2019, Fig represented Ireland at the Miss Universe competition, running on a platform for advocacy for women and diversity in STEM. Fionnghula is a NASA Datanaut, director of NASA's International Space Apps Challenge in Washington, D.C. And recently, just in case she wasn't busy enough, she founded a tech startup called Space to Reach, whose mission is to bridge the gap between Black and Brown women who work in STEM and tech companies looking for the next generation of talent. O'Reilly is also the newest correspondent to join CBS's Emmy-nominated STEM TV series, Mission Unstoppable. She has also recently completed her first astronaut training and hopes to inspire young women to pursue their dreams. First of all, Fionnghula, thank you so much. I know from social media that you're incredibly busy, and we're really, really thrilled to have your voice literally virtually with us as part of the conference. Thank you for carving out the time to do this in the first instance.
Oh, no problem, Miriam. Thank you so much for having me. I think this conference, the work that you all are doing is so impactful and very powerful. And it absolutely aligns with a lot of the work that I've been doing advocating for women who identify at the intersection of multiple identities, including Irish identity. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be speaking with you both. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we are too. And I want to start off with your name, because I alternated there in introducing you between Fig and Fionnghula, and you got Fionnghula, the very Irish GH in the middle spelling, and I know for my son who has a DH in the middle of his name that it can be a problem for Irish people in Ireland, not to mention people outside of Ireland. But your name and your connectivity between the Black American experience and the Irish experience are kind of interesting and unique in a way. Can you tell us a little bit about you, Fionnghula Fig O'Reilly, and how you enter into this conversation with us as part of the conference?
Absolutely. So my background, my mom is African American and my dad is Irish. And I grew up in a military family. So I grew up living in Ireland, America, Germany, and Italy. And I had a very nomadic family, very nomadic lifestyle because of that. And my name Fionnghula it's a very old traditional Irish name. It's spelt the very old way, Fionnghula. And it's so funny because growing up, as you can imagine, it was very difficult to try to get people to be able to say my name. Over time, the nickname Fig, it kind of came up. In Ireland, people know me as Fionnghula, but I'd say mostly in the States, people would know me as Fig. It's great because I'm one of 5 or one of six. I have five sisters, and two of us have Irish names, me and Aoife, my youngest sister, but three have African names, and one has an Arabic name, which is kind of, it was intentional. My parents, they wanted to be able to give us names from both sides of our backgrounds, and so that's even how the naming kind of began with my family, because they were trying to pay homage to both sides of our cultures. So Fionnghula, it's spelled a very old Irish way, but I'm very proud of my name, and I'm happy to share the story of it, because you don't often meet a lot of Black women whose name is Fionnghula. And so I think it's actually a really great way to kind of share my story right off the cuff when I meet somebody.
That's so interesting. I wonder if, given your siblings and the differences in your names, has that made a difference in how people receive you? One with an Irish name versus, say, an Arabic name?
I would say, because I do have sisters with African names or an Arabic name, when people meet me and say, "Oh, and you're Fionnghula," they actually ask if it's an African name. They don't think that it would be an Irish name. You know, looking at me, hearing my other sisters' names, I get more questions if it's an African name than I get if it's an Irish name. Outside of Ireland, of course. Inside Ireland, people would know that it's an Irish name.
Will you tell us, Fionnghula, a little bit about, you know, how your parents met and the trajectory for your dad to, if I'm understanding correctly, he ends up in the US military, right? That's what you mean. So
Yeah.
tell us about how this Irish guy ended up doing that and meeting your mom.
So my family on my dad's side, I think we're on 11 generations from Dublin. So my family is from North Dublin, from Sutton, Donabate, Swords area. And my dad grew up in Dublin, and he won the visa lottery to come to America when he was young. It was the late 80s. And the place that he chose to go to visit was San Francisco. He met my mom, who is from San Francisco in the city, and they wound up getting married, and they moved back to Ireland to start a family. And that's kind of where, I guess, my family's journey started. My dad was a bricklayer and a painter when he was living in San Francisco. And when he went back, though, to Ireland, he knew he wanted to start something else, start a career that would enable him to travel and do more things. And I have a grandfather who was a deputy commissioner of the Garda in Ireland. And so I think the uniformed service career path was definitely, my grandfather influenced him in his decision to join the US military. And so he enlisted in the US Army, and he has, been in the US military for 30 years coming up in 2022. So he's still in the US military, currently living in Mozambique. He's an attaché to the US Embassy in Mozambique currently.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've had the opportunity to live all over the place, to travel as a family, and it's been a very interesting experience, because it does give you a unique perspective, but also it's given me a unique experience because we've seen in different parts of the world how people respond to seeing our family, seeing a Black woman and a white Irish man, you know, a man with an accent, and a Black American woman with an American accent, and then 6 biracial kids. It does draw a lot of attention, as you can imagine. And we've been able to see and feel the differences of how people respond to our family, all over the world, depending on where we are.
So I know of which you speak quite directly, the kind of hypervisibility that interracial families have in certain places, but a visibility that in some ways obscures being fully seen. And so given that you've been able to travel in so many different places, what are the differences, say, between how your family is received in Ireland versus the US or Mozambique, say?
I would say that my experience in America would be very different from the experience that I've had in Ireland. I think Blackness is it's a very large conversation, a very complicated conversation in America. And I remember growing up not even realizing the difference between my mom and dad until other people started pointing it out, that my mom was Black and my dad was white. Growing up feeling that I had to choose which communities I was going to be a part of. And I remember having so many conversations with my sisters, with my parents as a family, on how do we even check boxes when we identify on these you know, the demographic papers that they send home from school. And I think we did attract a lot of attention. Being that my mother is a Black woman, I think that the Black community has always been very inclusive. Especially in America, of our family, but I have had negative experiences from very passively aggressive confrontations to the overtly aggressive sort, where you know, you may feel microaggressions to outright racism. No matter where I've gone, I've absolutely felt the variances of all of those things. I do think that, especially now that I've done more work, more advocating for Black women, I guess being more vocal about the Black experience of either biracial or well, the entire Black community in Ireland, which is inclusive of biracial people, mixed race people, but also people who may have immigrated from somewhere else and they have Black children and Black families. Now that I've been more vocal about, I guess, uplifting and sharing stories of Black people in Ireland, I think that I've seen, even in just recent years, so much change happen when it comes to how we discuss these stories. When I was a kid, I don't remember ever hearing as much as I hear now in media and news about Black stories, about the Black experience in Ireland. And I hope that I've been doing a good job at sharing my own story and being able to uplift others and share other stories as well, because it's something that I think is changing, but there's still more work to be done, I think, in Ireland, which it feels like there's a new movement that I haven't necessarily felt before. Whereas in America, for example, I think the movement has been around for a very long time. There just have been so many setbacks when it comes to inclusion and equality and equity. So I think there are similarities across the board, but definitely some strong differences as well.
I have another question, unless Miriam wants to jump in.
No, jump in, Kim.
Okay, because you know, you have been Miss Universe representative for Ireland, which is, you know, for a long time, these sorts of public figures who represent a nation, you know, come under a lot of scrutiny from the public as to whether or not the person in that role adequately represents the nation. So I'm very curious how, given your background, how your candidacy as Miss Universe was received in Ireland.
Wow, I love this question because what you said is very true. There is a lot of scrutiny when you are a title holder. And in the history of pageantry, there hasn't ever been a woman of color, full stop, that has represented Ireland, much less a Black woman or someone of mixed race. I personally identify as a Black woman, a biracial or mixed race Black woman, but it's a huge part of my identity, being a part of my culture, my identity. I think it's multifaceted, but it can get quite complicated when trying to explain to someone who may not have heard of this sort of story before. And when I won Miss Universe Ireland in 2019, it definitely felt so much bigger than just me. And it felt so incredible to finally break through this kind of glass ceiling, because we are talking about beauty pageants here. We're talking about women who are representing an entire country, beauty ideals of the country. And for the first time, we were uplifting someone who maybe did not fit the stereotype. I think a lot of people outside of Ireland, the international community, looks at Ireland and thinks, well, the stereotype is that of a racially and probably culturally homogenous society. But the truth is that there are a lot of people of diverse backgrounds that live in Ireland, but I think a lot of people don't know that. And so I felt my entire reign, it lasted 17 months. It started August 1st of 2019, and I passed the crown in December of 2020. So I reigned through the pandemic as well. And I can tell you, what a wild ride. When I first won the title, I received a lot of backlash from people who told me that there's no way that someone like me, a brown woman who has curly hair, right now I have braids in, but also, you know, braids are something that I love, that I think are beautiful, but people before me have not seen a beauty queen wearing braids in her hair, but I did often. But I did receive backlash where people told me there's no way that I could represent Irish beauty. There's no way that someone who looks like me could represent us. Those were probably the nicer comments that I received that were negative, but there were some really bad ones as well. But I kind of viewed the situation as an opportunity to talk, to have conversation, to spotlight stories that need to be spotlighted, to share my own story, but then also to, yes, I was able to walk through the door, but I've also been able to hold the door open for others that come after as well. And I do hope that we are not just scratching the surface when it comes to more inclusion in spaces where we have historically never been before in Ireland. And I think that's something that's very important for especially young girls, for young people to see that you don't have to necessarily fit some sort of stereotype. We are here, you know, we want to be included. And I think I've been able to show that. I've had a lot of opportunities to go out and speak, to use my voice, my platform. I've written op-ed pieces for different newspapers and magazines, and I've given a lot of talks at universities and conferences, on television, talking about my experience as yes, a Black Irish woman. And it's not something that a lot of people hear or see, but it is something that does exist. And I think the more we're able to kind of break down these conversations, the better we can improve inclusion efforts. I will say, I did not think as a beauty queen out of all the things that I do, I work in STEM, but also, you know, in the beauty space, I did not expect that I would be having these kinds of conversations as a beauty title holder, a beauty queen title holder. But what a unique opportunity to be able to talk about it, because I realized that it is a great thing to be able to say, no, Blackness is beautiful too, even in this space that, you know, maybe we didn't, maybe many of us have not traditionally thought that Blackness even exists, but it does. And so I'm really grateful that I have had the opportunity to speak to so many, and I continue to, because it's very important to me to kind of shine a spotlight on the ways in which that I think, you know, we should be amplifying Black voices in Ireland.
You know, you're reminding me of a generation ago when Vanessa Williams was crowned Miss America, and suddenly it seemed like overnight that people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you look like Miss America." Whereas before they'd be like, "What are you?" So there's a way that these sorts of public representations change people's perception, as you just described, of the nation. So thanks for that. That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up, I did not see myself in many women that I saw in media. And so when I did see someone that I could identify with, I remember, you know, loving Alicia Keys growing up, right? Because I could see myself represented in, you know, even this music, this singer. And I thought that was wonderful. But my hope is that, yeah, more young people, they can see themselves represented, because I think it just shows that you can exist in those places, those spaces, and you can also maybe do those things if you so choose, if you want, if you want to.
Fionnghula, can I just ask you, because you know you touched on the kind of sometimes like a lag in perception, or you know, because Irishness is so historically bound up in like, you know, a phenotype of people who look like me rather than you and Kim, the pushback against you representing Irishness in that vein, was that primarily out of Ireland, or was it elsewhere, or is it a combination? I'm just interested in how, is there a geographic kind of pattern in terms of how these conceptions of Irishness are being kind of played out and articulated when you come up to represent Ireland?
I did notice a mixture. I do want to say I did receive so much support, and an overwhelming amount of people were very supportive, though there was a small minority of people who, for example, wanted to know how I received my citizenship. They wanted to know how exactly was I Irish, and there were people calling for me to be disqualified from Ireland, and that definitely was interesting to see. I think the backlash that I kind of received from the international community was more so just an incredulous, what? We didn't know that there are non-white only, you know, people up there, not only, they, they were saying, we did not know there was more than just white people in Ireland. I think it was just incredulous in that way. So not necessarily as bad as someone saying, well, show us your passport, that kind of a thing. Which was interesting. Even, you know, the travel that I did as Miss Universe Ireland, it more so was just, wow, what a story. Can you tell me more about your background? Where's your father from? Where's your mother from? Just very inquisitive, I think, a lot, as many people are. But I do think that most of the negative backlash, the really hurtful things, were internal and from Ireland.
Interesting.
Yeah. I will say, on the other hand, recently, I have also received some backlash from people in Ireland who have said I'm not Black enough to be the first Black Miss Universe Ireland, which that was very troubling to hear as well. And growing up, being biracial, coming from a mixed race family, figuring out your identity is such a journey in the first place. It's such a journey. And I think that this conversation, it kind of came about because something that amazing happened, in that another Black woman won a beauty pageant, a title in Ireland. It's a different beauty pageant from the Miss Universe organization, but it was wonderful. And she has an amazing story. But unfortunately, I think because there are so few women of color that occupy space in media, in public spaces in Ireland, immediately people started comparing us and saying really negative things about her in general, because she was a Black woman that won this title, but also about me, and criticizing my Blackness and comparing it to hers. That's something that I was astounded by, you know, hearing from people that I'm not Black enough, and hearing from people that questioning her identity as well. That was tough to see. But I think it's important that we have these conversations, because it's still kind of going on, that people it can be hard to see how people sometimes take you know, Black women, you know, she earned her title in the best way, but it's hard to see how sometimes people can be very negative about Black people occupying spaces that maybe they've not been allowed to occupy before.
Well, on that note, one of the things that strikes both Miriam and I about um, what you're up to is that you're interested in, STEM and data science and spaces where, of course, where efforts to bring more people who have not necessarily been in those contexts in great numbers, to make that a space of possibility for regardless of race. I'm really curious about what your influences were growing up that moved you into STEM field.
Influences that moved me into STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. I didn't have anyone close to me that was an engineer or a doctor or a scientist. But school was one of the consistent things in my life because we traveled so much. I went to 9 different schools growing up, and which is a lot of schools. You're starting over often, but one of the things that I could always turn to was schoolwork, and I was never good at English. I didn't like literature or writing papers. I always found it very difficult, but I was good at math, and that was my best subject. And when I was 14, I had a math teacher who came to me. At the time, we were living in San Francisco, and he came to me and said he had heard about a program, a summer math and science honors academy at UC Berkeley, and it's for high school students. You would spend your summers on campus learning STEM. And I thought to myself, there is no way that I'm going to be spending my summers back at school learning. But the last day applications were open just before they were going to close. He came to me and he said, Fig, I need you to apply to this program. So I applied and I was accepted. And so I spent the next 3 summers. We had moved since, but wherever we were, my parents would send me back to this program to complete the program. And so I spent 3 summers at UC Berkeley, and I studied nothing but science, technology, engineering, and math. And so that's where I first started learning how to code. It was a phenomenal experience because the program specifically was designed and developed for young women and people of color, people from low-income families who may not have had an opportunity like this before. And I fit all of those 3 things, those 3 bills. And it was great because for the first time in my life, I met other students that were just as enthusiastic about these subjects as I. And we had women and people of color that were our teachers, our professors. And it was really great because it just broke down what it meant to be an engineer. I didn't know what it really looked like. But then also I had this experience where I saw these people that I could identify with that were doing it themselves. And until I had that aha moment, I didn't even, it wasn't even on my radar that I could do something like this. And so when I was applying to college, I knew I wanted to be an engineer. And so I applied to the George Washington University, which is where I studied systems engineering before moving into the tech world.
That's great. And I'm so glad you mentioned Berkeley.
I was just thinking Kim's going to love that Berkeley shout out there.
Did you attend Berkeley?
I got my doctorate at Berkeley.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great school. The hills on the campus. Oh my goodness.
Maybe you guys were there at the same time.
I'm sure we might have been. But if you didn't go there until you were 9, I may have just left.
Okay. Yeah, I was from 14 to 17. Yeah.
Oh, okay, 14. Sorry, somehow I thought 9. Yeah. So we were gone by then. But
it's also a reason why I think I'm very passionate and now about visibility. One of our producers for Mission Unstoppable, Gina Davis, she always says, you can't be what you can't see. And I've found that to be very true, because unless I had those influences, I probably would not, I wouldn't have become an engineer. And so I think the show, it's really great because we break down stereotypes. All the people that I interview on the show are women. They're women from different backgrounds. And it's been important for me to kind of return what was given to me. And so a lot of the programs that I do, a lot of the organizations that I work with, we share the mission of wanting to kind of, change the face of STEM, show that you don't have to be an old white man in a lab coat. You can look like anybody and do this sort of job. Working with different organizations in Ireland, Engineers Ireland. I'm an ambassador for Engineers Ireland for the past couple of years. And it's been great being able to work with children and show them, you can be anybody and do this sort of a thing.
Can I ask you, Fionnghula, you know, as you reigned as Miss Universe Ireland, in some way, like, the world was turned upside down in terms of the global pandemic, and then the events of early summer 2020 have really, changed or amplified conversations about Blackness, right? And you are this first biracial, Black identifying mixed race woman. And I know from conversations that you and I have had before, that the kind of the impact of what happened in the United States, of course, I'm speaking about the murder of George Floyd and what came after, really has reverberated in Ireland. And you're someone kind of well positioned, a little bit of a remove, but connected in a way, who can see that kind of before and after effect a little bit. Can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of energies and what you've seen kind of happening, and how you've kind of touched on how you've contributed to those conversations, or what more you think, we need to do in terms of just keeping these conversations going and making representation and equality and diversity, not just something that we talk about for a brief period of time?
Yes, absolutely. So at the time I was living in Ireland, I moved back during the pandemic a little later, but I go back about twice a year for a month to 6 weeks each time I go. And it was such a transformational period, I think, watching this story, the movement unfold. We watched as the news of George Floyd's killing, his murder, made its way throughout the US, but then I want to say maybe a week or so after it made national news in the US, it really hit in Ireland. And I've never seen such national conversation on race in Ireland until this unfortunate and tragic event happened, and then Black Lives Matter movement started really in earnest. It reached the shores of Ireland, and you turn on the radio, you turn on the news, and it was all anybody could talk about was not just this one event, but what is the Black experience in Ireland, and what does that look like, And so many people started sharing stories of their experiences, Black people of all backgrounds. And I thought it was such a monumental thing because, one, I'd never seen it. And a conversation of, well, how do we make spaces more inclusive? How do we bring more people of color to the forefront? Those conversations started happening. And it was very powerful. And I was happy to be a part, because it was something that, I'd never seen, was shocked that this was how the conversation was even starting in Ireland because of this event that happened in the US. And I think that there was a lot of momentum in the beginning, but I have started to see some changes in the past year or so. Though one thing that I have noted that is important is, yes, we had so much conversation, but how do we continue to take action over time? And I'm a data person, and so I like things that are measurable. When we can use numbers to track our progress, I think that is one great way to indicate what we've done. And as far as something that I think more people that would like to see is accountability in storytelling and in media, being able to honor Black stories, but also diversifying people who are telling these stories, because someone who maybe does not have the experience or the understanding to tell these very nuanced stories may not honor them in the way that they should be told. And this year I had the pleasure of participating in a documentary about Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is the first historically Black sorority founded in 1908, which I am proudly a part of. And I was a part of this documentary with some phenomenal women of AKA, including Vice President Kamala Harris. And we recently won some awards, and I had an opportunity to sit down and interview the directors and producers of the film at a screening. And the conversation surrounded, why is it important for Black women specifically to tell their own stories? And ultimately, it really boils down to, no one can tell it better. And if you don't tell it, then someone else will, and they may not get it right. So when it comes to using my platform, when it comes to having these stories shared, I do speak up pretty vocally, and I try to hold space, not just for myself, but for other women, because if we're not telling our stories, they'll get marginalized and they'll get lost, and they won't get brought to the forefront. And I think that's something that is important when continuing to take action to make these spaces more equitable for everybody.
So I'm really curious, given that all that has been evolving in the last year and a half, do you feel able to say things now that 2 years ago, either in Ireland or the US, you felt unable to utter?
No, I think I was pretty vocal. Yeah, it is difficult as a reigning title holder I think what I've learned through pageantry is that how amazing is it, one, to have a platform where you can be an advocate for change, but one of the things that I learned is that I want to bring people together, and I don't want to separate them or divide them, even through the things that I share. So I think I've always been pretty vocal about how important it was for me to talk about Blackness in Ireland, and luckily the Miss Universe Ireland organization was very supportive of that. And everyone on my team at the time, a team of over 10 people on the Miss Universe Ireland team, they were all white. And I was the first person of color in the organization in general. And I think one thing that I applaud them on is that we did a lot of talking about how I wanted to represent myself, how we wanted to be able to represent myself on the platform of Ireland at Miss Universe, and they were very supportive of the things that I brought to the table, how important it was for me to be able to speak up, to be myself, to look and feel like myself, to be able to share who I am without diminishing who I am or shying away from conversations that maybe some people never thought beauty queens would be talking about. I think traditionally there is a way that a lot of beauty queens reign, but I'm seeing a more modern approach to pageantry. And it's something that I'm very proud of. I would definitely call myself a more modern title holder, in that I think we have unique opportunities to create change, use our voices, and I definitely don't shy away from it. And I haven't then, and I won't now.
Fionnghula, you've packed so much into the first 28 years, and by your example in terms of your representing excellence across fields and breaking down barriers of assumptions of what pageantry can mean, the stereotypical idea of a beauty queen or a beauty pageant title holder who, doesn't have the smarts, which you could clearly demonstrate, and how you're kind of paying it forward. Do you have like, I don't know, like other like long-term ambitions to, like, what else do you want to do? Like, you've done more than like a lot of people do in like many more years. Are there other things that you want to do to build on your profile and keep advocating and amplifying and demonstrating? That word intersectionality is thrown around a lot, but you're a whole bundle of intersectionality in such great ways. What can we expect from you, or what do you aspire to in the long term?
There are so many things. I do think I'm uniquely positioned at the intersection of so many different identities, whether it's engineer, beauty queen, African American, Irish, all of the different things that I do. Recently, I completed my first astronaut training. I got to fly in 0G and experience weightlessness like the astronauts they feel when they're on the International Space Station. That was a phenomenal experience. And I got to bring my show Mission Unstoppable with me, which was really great. So yeah, we will have some awesome behind the scenes footage of that. And there are so many things that I would like to do, but one of the things that is important for me is to continue being able to kind of build multiple careers at one time. I think my generation, the millennials, they coined a really awesome term, multi-hyphenate, which I think I prescribe to that term, and I would like to continue my work as an engineer, but also I love working in fashion, and I was able to, for example, 2 days ago, I walked in a runway show that was featured on Vogue, which is the first time. I've been doing runway for 10 years, and I finally got to Vogue. So I want to be able to continue doing all of the above. One day, I hope to be able to maybe have my own talk show where I get to bring all of the conversations that are meaningful to me to the forefront and be able to share and spotlight more people. I think that's a really large goal that I have, that hopefully you'll see me one day. I'll have my own fig show.
Well, we'll be watching that space. Fionnghula, thank you so much. And Kim, thank you for joining me. This has been a lot of fun and a real pleasure to have the opportunity to kind of document your story in our way through what we're doing with the conference. And I hope you're so generous. I really applaud you and appreciate your enthusiasm and your openness. You're very busy, and I really, you're really leading by example in terms of your willingness to represent and amplify. And I commend you for that, because that's a lot, and it's kind of exhausting at times. So you're really talking the talk and walking the walk, and we hope that we have opportunities to collaborate with you in the future. And I commend you to keep doing what you're doing, right, Kim?
Absolutely. I feel proud of you. I have nothing to do with it, but I feel so proud of what you're doing.
I know, me too. Me too.
I
Thank you
so much, Miriam and Kim. I mean, being able to even be a part of this conversation, when I heard about the conference, I thought, what a phenomenal thing. There's so many people that are doing so much work, and I'm grateful that I was able to take part and share my story. You guys are absolutely phenomenal, and I really appreciate it.
Well, and as your star goes further and further up, Fionnghula, you've to remember the little people, because but in all seriousness, these are conversations and they're really important. But the title of the conference is "Where do we go from here?" And this sense of like action, or continuing. Kim and I are only mere scholars, and we can do what we can do, but no, we have to, this has to be clearly an ongoing conversation and a sensibility of action and keeping things going. So we may be calling on you in the future to help us with that.
Absolutely. Please always keep me in mind. I absolutely call on me. I will be there.